Hi, my name is Elizabeth Wright. I'm currently a third grade teacher at Kermit R. Booker Senior Elementary School in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm finalizing the work for my master's degree in elementary education. The final course of my college requirements has focused on multicultural education. This course has been a journey filled with reflection on my experiences and anticipation for my future as an educator. This course began with a vulnerable self-reflection and self-portrait. Edutopia published a video on exploring perceptions about identity through self-portraits that reflected on the difference between visible and invisible identity markers. These include invisible markers that we may try to hide, such as mental health. Our own biases can show through regarding race, classism, religion, disability, and sexual orientation classifications. This assignment affirmed my belief that as educators, we should be embracing the identities of ourselves and others around us. It also helped me confirm that we need to set and maintain healthy boundaries in our classrooms. Healthy boundaries that teachers must maintain are categorized through professionallearningboard.com. Healthy categories include emotional, relationship, power, communication, and physical boundaries. Emotional boundaries help educators to avoid letting their own emotions influence their behaviors and attitudes toward their students. We strive to consider all students equal and important, refrain from treating students as favorites, and prevent personal problems from interfering with work duties. Emotional boundaries also help develop emotional independence among students and their peers. Relationship boundaries help keep teaching relationships professional. These prevent teachers from forming inappropriate relationships with students, contacting or meeting students outside of school without prior approval from parents, or extending services past permissible school schedules. Power boundaries ensure that the position of an educator is not misused to harm students through rewarding or punishing students inappropriately, bribing or threatening students, or failing to respond to students' claims of bullying or abuse in a timely manner. Communication boundaries include having transparency in all of the communication between an educator and the families of their students. Just as we need to refrain from sharing personal information, we also need to provide clear communication about when and how students and their families can contact teachers. Examples of appropriate communication methods at my current school include phone calls using the school phone number, face-to-face interactions during school dismissal, email, and class dojo. Physical boundaries help build safety, respect, and autonomy. This includes giving our students privacy during moments like restroom breaks and appropriate physical space. Just as we need to have these boundaries in place, we need to accept and acknowledge the importance of the boundaries students set with their educators and their peers. An additional way to connect with students on an individual basis is through respecting and valuing their name. The most consistent thing we ask from our students is to write their name. This poster from Ms. K reminds students to write their names as the very first thing they do. We tell students the importance of having their name written correctly on their papers, and in return, we need to show respect for their name. My name has been mispronounced throughout my life as Elisabetta due to its spelling. I have also had a multitude of negative experiences with surnames as a parent. Because we have had 3 children with 3 different last names in our household, my children and I have each had our last names assumed and addressed incorrectly. The Qatar Foundation addressed the association between understanding someone's name and understanding them as an individual. Educators have power that makes it difficult for students to correct them. Persisting in saying a student's name incorrectly or trying to call them by a nickname is a microaggression, which is quoted as an indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination. We also learn unintended lessons in school, such as whether or not our individuality or our culture has value. These unintended lessons we learn in school are called hidden curriculum. Learning names are a way we can communicate equity and accountability in our classrooms. This communicates that we know their names, we want to know them, and we desire the opportunity to learn something about them. Marrun's article, Culturally Responsive Teaching Across Pre-K through 20, Honoring the Historical Naming Practices of Students of Color, teaches us that correctly pronouncing students' names demonstrates cultural caring, respect, and an affirmation of their identity. Being patient and asking for help in pronouncing student names are important steps to deepen relationships and further the rapport we need to effectively teach our students. Next, we dedicated time to understanding the different types of racism that occur in our society. California Newsreel helped me understand that systemic racism attributes our physical differences to racial types and rankings of offenses. Conditions of immigration, such as poverty and linguistic differences, have contributed to how large groups of people were denied large groups of people were denied job opportunities, naturalized citizenship, land ownership, and voting rights due to a person's skin color or line of ancestry. Amara Public drew attention to redlining practices. Redlining was an accepted practice that blocked off entire neighborhoods from public and private investments. As a result, loans and public services would be denied based entirely on race. Home ownership, loans to further education, and educational segregation resulted. Interpersonal racism refers to how implicit bias impacts the rights and opportunities of others. Implicit biases show how we perceive people subconsciously. This affects personal relationships and solidifies societal norms. Interpersonal racism manifests through educational inequities such as narrow scholarship programs, practices that affect students' ability to participate, and the selection and sharing of student work samples. Structural racism can be presented as having good intentions that result in unacceptable outcomes. This was represented through internment camps for Japanese immigrants, seizures of land, and removal of Native American children from their homes, as well as housing projects within cities for Black and Latino residents. Inequities furthered as what was intended to be corrective measures were removed or demolished without substitution. Another form of structural racism occurs with our students and families who have linguistic differences. We need to focus on the beauty and value of multilingualism by adding in English rather than trying to remove or delete a native language. Nieto and Bode warn, quote, "The major difference between individual and institutional discrimination is the wielding of power. It is primarily through the power of the people who control institutions, such as schools, that oppressive policies and practices are reinforced and legitimized," end quote. As educators, we need to show care and attention to issues of racism with our growing generations and actively work to combat their racial prejudice and injustice. These powerful tools work towards systemic change in our schools, communities, and country. We need to foster inclusive environments, ensure equity in education, promote social justice, and encourage critical thinking. These steps will allow students to learn about and create positive changes as they grow in an environment where they are safe, loved, respected, and valued. Continuing to promote a classroom environment that teaches our students to research, evaluate, and interpret data will prepare them for the ever-changing climate of our society. Having a zero-tolerance zone for racism and bullying also allows students access, equity, and the opportunity to thrive. Building a timeline reflecting racial desegregation in Nevada schools has allowed me to see pivotal moments in how we've progressed as a society, as well as having a long way to go in addressing educational equity. I've highlighted 15 significant events in our history. Responding to hate and violence in the West outlined the beginnings of our location. Nevada entered the United States as an anti-slavery territory in 1861. However, discriminatory laws are created were created that ban marriage between Black and white people and even prohibit Black people from testifying in court against white people. 1896 brought the ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson. This court case determined that segregation is separate but equal. As a result, segregation was deemed constitutional. Las Vegas was founded in 1905. In the 1920s, Las Vegas and other Nevada locations began seeing demonstrations from the Ku Klux Klan. In 1931, construction began on the Hoover Dam, which worsened job and housing discrimination. Due to the immensely prevalent racism and segregation, the 1950s brought Las Vegas the title of Mississippi of the West. Desegregation in southern Nevada informed us that 1954 was the year Brown versus the Board of Education ruled against prior court cases. This made it unconstitutional to separate children in public schools by race. In 1968, the NAACP brought forward the court case Keller versus Mason. Quoting desegregation in southern Nevada, the NAACP feels that Black people who are innocent of the creation of the need for a monster known as busing should not be required to bear the brunt of the school integration burden through one-way busing, housing segregation, and a drawing of racial attending zones that made busing necessary. In 1970, Judge Thompson's ruling mandated that Vegas schools had been segregated intentionally. As a result, the 6th grade center plan was created in 1972. This enacted a plan in which all students were bused to school specifically for 6th grade as a means of desegregation. School resegregation in the Mississippi of the West, Community Counternarratives on the Return to Neighborhood Schools in Las Vegas, 1968 to 1994, highlighted the creation of Prime 6 schools in 1992. This is when the African American community requested a return to neighborhood schools and to end busing. This community enacted a boycott during Count Day, and Prime 6 schools were created. The Civil Rights Project at UCLA highlighted that the Supreme Court outlawed voluntary integration in 2007. Teaching People's History is cited for the creation of the Zen Education Project, which provides resources for teaching history in classrooms. Campaigns from the Zen Education Project include Teach Reconstruction, Teach Climate Justice, Teaching for Black Lives, and Abolish Columbus Day. Responding to Hate and Bias in the West details an incident at Arborview High School in 2019. This catastrophic display of racial hate included racial slurs, threats, hanging nooses, and displaying Confederate flags. Some of the students were given direct death threats, and the parents of those students created a group for change called No Racism in Schools, #1865. This group fights for causes including crisis response teams and improved mental health support in schools. Teaching People's History also highlighted our most recent event on our timeline, with 2021 bringing the launch of Zen Education Project's Teach Truth Pledge. Calling for personal history and identity tasked me with deep questioning of how I was raised in Utah. Some of the inequities and racial underrepresentation was noticeable even when I was in elementary school. Because my father brought our family to Las Vegas frequently during my childhood and teenage years, I knew and wondered about the lack of diversity in my community. I grew up in the city of Orem, Utah. The U.S. Census Bureau lists data for the year 2022, estimating that Orem had a population of 95,910. Race and Hispanic origins list white non-Hispanic as 74.6% of the city's population at that time. Hispanic or Latino are accounted at 17.6%, followed by 8.9% with 2 or more races. Asian individuals are listed at 1.4%. Most notably, American Indian, Native Hawaiian, and Black or African American individuals were each reported as less than 1% of the city's population. Growing up, this community was even less diverse than it is now, or in the numbers that I have given you from 2022. This meant that I grew up in a racially homogenous community in which the only people I consistently interacted with were white or Hispanic. As an adult, this was a factor in my desire to leave Utah, as I did not want my children growing up without seeing the beauty and friendship of cultures and nationalities other than my own. Utah has a long-standing tradition of censoring education. Some examples of this are more obvious than others, such as limited access to information regarding birth control, reproduction, and sexual health. As I grew up, it became clear that Utah also censored the history of Native American and Black people in the state. This led to whitewashing in my K-12 education. The Badger Herald helps clarify, quote, "Often the history taught in school leaves out important events and underrepresented communities, or paints an entirely different, whitewashed picture. Whitewashed history leaves out minority and marginalized communities, or hides the truth to make historical situations seem more palatable for white teachers to teach." This article continues, mentioning that educators carry the burden of fixing this broken practice. Making connections between our coursework and our lives has affirmed my belief that each child is individually unique, valuable, and deserving of a high-quality, equitable education. Making connections, forming relationships with our students, and pushing for equality and equity must be achieved through active roles, rather than merely deeming blatant examples of racism as unacceptable. Without playing an active role in stopping society's implicit biases and refusing the social norms surrounding racism, we cannot solve anything. We must push for and include ethnic studies and clear representative history in order to make an impact in positive change. We also need these tools so that we do not repeat historical catastrophes such as the Holocaust in and around Germany and Japanese internment camps in the United States. Thank you.